We're all ready to go. Welcome everybody to the library. You are in the Department of Special Research Collections. Raise your hand if you've been here before. Okay, well now you've all been here, yay! My name is Angel Diaz and I'm the curator for CEMA, the California Ethnic and Multicultural Archives, which is a part of Special Collections. I'm very excited to present this talk or to have Melanie Cervantes here today. Um, Today's event is part of a two-brief artist residency that included a lecture at Santa Barbara Public Library, a screen print workshop um, at and residency in the art department, and a class with Xican and Chicano studies. This has been a collaboration between many people, including Micaela Diaz Sanchez, Priscilla Ibarra, Mariela Aguilar, and John Jairo Valencia, representing Las Maestras Center. Yay. um, as well as Alex Lucas, Keisha Mrotek, and Ruben Ochoa representing the art department. So I was very happy to work with all of them. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with CEMA, it was established in 1988 as an archival collecting initiative that supported the ethnic studies departments, Black studies, Asian American studies, and Chicana and Chicano studies. Our foundational collections were self-help graphics, Galería de la Raza, El Teatro Campesino, and the establishment of these relationships solidified CEMA's foundation as a repository that preserves and celebrates the legacy of important visual, literary, and performing arts organizations that, since the 1960s and 1970s, have embedded themselves with community and that organize themselves to be in service and support for their communities. And so when it came to planning an artist residence program, a visiting artist program, my mind was on Melanie from the start. Her work and her approach to working and living is one that values community, as we'll hear more about. She was also a student of Celia Herrera Rodriguez, one of the founding maestras at Las Maestras Center. So it's all connected and it all makes sense. So I want to introduce Melanie. So this is an artist talk. So there's a bio. So I have a little bit more to read, okay? Melanie Cervantes has never lived far from the California coast. Born in Harbor City, California, and raised in Lawndale, Melanie now makes her home in Oakland, where she creates visual art inspired by the people around her and her community's desire for radical social transformation. Melanie creates a visual lexicon of resistance that invites curiosity, raises consciousness, and inspires solidarities among communities of struggle. In 2007, she co-founded Dignidad Rebelde, a graphic arts collaboration that produces screen prints, political posters, and multimedia projects. These works are grounded in third world and indigenous movements that build people's power to transform the conditions of displacement and loss of culture resulting from histories of exploitation. Dignidad Rebelde's purpose is to illustrate stories of struggle, resistance, and triumph into artwork that can be put back into the hands of the communities who inspire it. Cervantes has exhibited extensively nationally, including at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the National Museum of Mexican Art, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and Museum of Modern Art in New York, as well as internationally in France, Slovenia, and Mexico. Her work is in the permanent collections of the Latin American collection of the Green Library at Stanford, the Rohner Special Collections Library at Dartmouth College, and the Library of Congress, as well as here at UCSB Special Collections in CEMA. So after her talk, I invite you to grab a snack and then put it down and then come on over here to see some of her work as it's represented, just as a sampling from the collection that we have here. So with that, I present to you Melanie.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I wanted to add something that I hadn't kind of planned on saying. So I heard Angel talking about like the triumvirate. Um, all three of those organizations, institutions, community groups have influenced who I am. So before before I moved to the Bay, I used to look at the websites of Galeria de la Raza and CEMA quite a bit. It was even before I considered going back to school. I was always a fan of art, and I just would look at the listings for CEMA because there wasn't digitized art, but I would read what was there and I would like fantasize, oh, I wish I could see what was in those boxes. That's how nerdy or am. Um, and along the way, as I began to kind of have my practice, really early on, I was part of a poetry collective called Independence that traveled. I didn't really do too much poetry. I had like two poems, but I took my artwork, and a lot of it was paintings. It was before I had screen printing class. And one of the sites was in San Juan Bautista at Teatro Campesino. It's the only time I chose to perform a poem. And it's the only time I ever performed a poem absolutely perfectly. Every word, every part of the cadence. Like, I didn't even recognize who I was. I was like, what just happened? That was like so amazing. And I know that like I know it was the spirit of the place. It was so meaningful to be there, to know the history, to know the people who had touched that place, to be with Luis's children. Like Kiko was there. They did a jam that brought out all of a sudden, I don't know, we're out of the crevices of the earth. There was like musical instruments, and then we were jamming. So Teatro Campesino was a very important moment in my development as an artist. Galeria de la Raza, likewise. I coveted that place. And I remember the very first time I went to the mission once I got to school, and I was like, finally, it's not just an image on a web page. And so I just feel like and self-help graphics. Self-help graphics provided the model of a screen printing studio that Dignidad Rebelde is based on. Like earlier on, Jesus had been exposed to the model with a lead printer, publishing prints, like the whole history there. So like I could not be the artist I am without those organizations existing. So I just wanted to contextualize myself in that history before I jumped in. Okay. So this is little Melody, maybe around 4 years old, with a drawing that is the earliest documented work that I have. I was in Lawndale in SoCal. I was born in Tonga Territory, which is Harbor City. That's what it's known as now. And um, so I have always liked making. I've always liked color. I've always liked layout. Like, but I never thought of it as anything distinct other than activity I enjoyed. I liked learning how to make things, and I was a big library kid. So if I didn't know how to do something, this was pre Google. My Google then was the library, the card catalog. I'm like, where's the DIY how to cross stitch? I'm going to teach myself how to cross stitch. Where's the, like anytime it's the same right inclination because I know all y'all do Google searches for how do I do this? Um, that was what I did, but in the library. And so I never really thought of myself in relationship with art until I met Celia. I took a Chicanx history class in the Chicano Studies department. And I think it was like Mexicana art, history, and something. I don't know. She always had the longest titles for her classes. And her pedagogy was quite distinct from other Berkeley professors. You were required to make art for your grade in her class. I had no problem with this. It was one of the most enjoyable activities that I was required to do in my time at Berkeley. And in doing that, I started to find that space within myself, how it felt to do that work, as opposed to the stress that I felt in the English department, which was incredibly racist. I felt like I was pushed out because I came in as an English major with the intention to be a professor in English, and I left and I ended up switching to ethnic studies. But I found something else in the art making. And Celia insisted that I was an artist, and I insisted that I wasn't. But eventually she convinced me, and here I am. Thank goodness for Celia. So in 2007, I had already graduated from Berkeley for 3 years. I had taken a screen printing course at the community college after UC Berkeley on a Saturday with a wonderful artist that was part of the Black Arts movement. It was the last time that class was offered because of California budget cuts. The class session after the next semester, the class was cut. All of the facilities still were in place. All of the equipment was in place, but they didn't have money to pay an instructor. So the opportunity I had to learn disappeared. So if I talked about what I did and how I did it to others in the Bay, especially, they were set up for disappointment because I'm like, you can't do it anymore. But there's a political reason, because of the budget cuts. And this was the decision that they made where that cut was going to hit. So, I met Jesus and he asked, are you going to take the class again? And I was like, yes. He's like, well, you don't have to. We can work together. And quickly we started to do skill shares. I had learned how to do like paper cut stencils that would make multiples with by spray painting. He taught me how to use Photoshop and Illustrator. There were many tears involved. I had a really hard time learning it, but we did that kind of exchange because we were so excited about different kinds of making. And eventually we founded Dignidad Rebelde. And the roots and origin of that project aren't as intentional as you might think. Originally, he said, I'm going to start a website because his friends had a company and they did web coding and website design. And what should I call it? I was like, you should just take a name from one of your prints. And one of his prints said, I think Somos la Dignidad Rebelde, was about a Zapatista. I was like, that one's good. So that's how the name came, in case you had any idea that it was something more constructed. And he said, I'm going to write about art, toys, and music, things I like. I was like, cool, me too. I invited myself to a project that I was never intended to be part of. So that's how we started. And within a year, I think we actually sat down and said, no, like, what are we really doing here? Because as we started to carry out our work, it was clear there were shared values, shared politics, a shared intention around what we were doing. And so that came after. But the way it started, it was a little bit more haphazard than you might think. But it's been great. Next year will be 20 years of this project. We're based in the Bay. So as Chicanx people that are in diaspora, we know we're not standing on our ancestral lands. So for us, doing solidarity work with the Ohlone people in our area is critically important as visitors, right? As people in diaspora. So this is like examples of how we do that as printmakers, right? Yes, we can do it in land acknowledgements, but what do we do? What's the main space that we occupy? And that is this work. So there's something called a Shumi tax that's a volunteer give back that you can like structure into your giving for the year. And it goes to it's a nonprofit structure, but it's a land trust. And that land trust allows for Ohlone people to have their lands again, to be able to do a ceremony on that land, to be able to do exchanges with other visiting Indigenous people. And now there's been a lot of really great wins. Like they were able to get a plot of land that's a sacred land that was going to be built into like a shopping plaza, but that has ancestors buried. They were able to defeat before Standing Rock through an encampment. They were able to defeat the desecration of another sacred site that was going to be made into a walking trail and bathrooms. So they got an easement through that, and that that whole strategy of doing like a land occupation, I saw it before I ever went to Standing Rock. I saw it and it worked. In fact, one of the most interesting people to show up was MC Hammer. That's all I'll say. He showed up and supported financially, so it was amazing. Um, so, um, sorry, I like putting all the little tidbits. You'll see through this talk, I will do that. So it is critically important for us to put the work back into the hands of the people that inspire it. So many times the artwork that we are distributing in the streets, which is well over 25,000 hand-pulled prints at this point, probably more than that. I haven't done the math on it in a while. Is also the artwork that ends up in major institutions. Some of the prints that people have carried in the streets over and over again are the same ones that end up in the Smithsonian. You know, it's a different copy, and one's pristine and one's kind of battle worn, but they all have value because they reach the people through those multiple means. Much of our work, as Angel mentioned, is informed by social movements. And so you will see a lot of different topics touched when you look at the body of our work, much of it looking at capitalism, colonialism, you know, all of these systems that impact the structures of our lives and that need to be changed. A lot of our work also really echoes the political printmakers that have come before us. So the Cuban solidarity, or not really Cuban based, but internationalist collective, OSPAL, the organization of the solidarity between people of Asia, Latin America, and Africa, was just critically important. Came out of the Bandung conference when the Soviet Union and the US were like kind of at war with each other. And they were like, well, what about us? Well, screw you guys. We're going to create our own structure. And they had a magazine that was distributed most often to folks like people in the room. College students were the primary subscribers to the magazine. And in that magazine, there was a centerfold, not of a boy band member, but of a political topic. So images like the one on the far right, which is a contemporary one, echoes the aesthetics, the internationalist politics, and the practice of having multiple languages to access the story for multiple audiences. And as much as we are known as like printmakers, we actually do not limit ourselves in medium. We do installation, photography. I'm expanding into sculpture, which I'll come back to later in the presentation, because we really see every means that we can use for our liberation as valid. We see the taller or the workshop process, like the one we just had before this, as a place for horizontal knowledge exchange. We come together and open up our wounds in order to share and heal from them collectively, and allow that sharing to act as a balm and a space for solutions to emerge. I just absolutely love collective work, and it's integrated into all aspects of our practices, whatever mediums that we choose to engage. This is just a little snapshot from Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. This is already very dated. Like, we have way more work, but we really like making prints. We really like making work, and we kind of are never stop. So it's just like ongoing. Oh, one thing I forgot to ask if the audio is going to work with this, because I have a video slide next. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about working with social movements. This next video is about 13 years old, but I feel like it shows rather than tells. One of the things I will say is that we live in an era where spaces, especially for those of us that live in California, it's a contentious thing, right? Because it's so expensive to be in California, and it's so expensive to have space in the metropoles like San Francisco or Oakland or LA. And, you know, there historically, for folks that understand the history here, there used to be centros culturales. You could go up and down the coast and land in a cultural center that was like resourced, and, you know, you could engage. And those things right up. Like there's a very particular history, there's a divestment, there's a strategy for people having to sign loyalty oaths, there's all this history. Knowing that, we have really been intentional about not letting any of that stop us. And what you're going to see is a what we call a print party or an art build that we did in a shoe store, because that was the space that we could get. A friend of mine owned a shoe store, and it was a event that was organized in response to organizers inside the prisons asking us to take action for an upcoming legislative action that would challenge the inhumanity of solitary confinement and youth and adult facilities. All right, so.
I think that's connected to the Zoom as well.
Yeah.
Let's see. Is there share sound? Okay.
I don't think so. Oh, there it is. I love that video. Partly I love that video because this is the first time we ever kind of experimented with doing work that way. And what happened is that, a lot of people came in through the entry point of the art and had never been to a legislative hearing in Sacramento before, had never engaged at that level, and went for the first time because of the art builds. They got to hear people testify. They got to hear young people testify to talk about how torturous it is to be a kid and be put into solitary confinement. And that last photo is pictures of people that were testifying because they had experienced that directly, or they were family members of people who had been there. So they were the ones that collected the artwork. They were the ones that got the artwork because they were there for that. And so when I say we like to make artwork to put it back in the hands of people and inspire it, that's what it looks like. Just to lift up, and it's part of the reason that I included this story, is that, we really intentionally keep the artwork of Rennie Templeton alive. Rennie was an incredible artist who I never met while she was alive. She was very active in the 70s, and we've really used her artwork quite a bit for these kinds of movement events. like here, adding the language that is around the contemporary struggle to distribute these. And Rini's work is in CEMA. This is Rini. And so I just wanted, she's been a huge influence on me, the way that she thought. She made work that she called Xerox art that she gave away freely so that movements could use it. And I still, like, I'll walk out to a mobilization today in San Francisco and there's a Rini Templeton art on a banner that someone projected and painted. Here's another example. There was a struggle to fight back against the use of Department of Homeland Security money that came through to something that was called Urban Shield. It was basically a weapons expo and training bazaar that originally started in Oakland, but which many of us fought to get out of Oakland. Then it went to the Alameda County Fairgrounds. That's where they do the annual fair. It's where I go see goats and look at the lights and, all the fun things that you think about a county fair. Instead, in that moment, was transformed into a place where these institutions got to share tactics of repression, including Israeli Defense Forces coming to train police departments on how to use their strategies. So there was a coalition of us that wanted to see that money divested and not be put to use that way in our county. I've said this before in other sessions. I'm like, I like to share the wins because we don't always get a lot of them. We won. We got them. We had to go quite a bit to fight back against this, but we got them to stop using this money in Alameda County and to stop allowing this to happen. I wanted to share one other story. The reason this is important, I'm nowhere in Santa Barbara, but why it matters, even though you're not there, is because it's all connected. So when I went to Standing Rock, and I was talking to the people who had been arrested for praying on the freeway, when they were arrested because they're mass arrests, you got to remember, Morton County Sheriff's Police Department was not used to the critical mass that showed up to fight back against the pipeline. They were using zip ties that they had acquired at Urban Shield. They didn't know how to use them properly, and they were complaining about the fact that they weren't, good, because it wasn't their failure to do it properly, right? It was like the fault of the thing itself. So they're like, what is this? Like, where'd you get this? How we got this in Oakland? And so some of the people who were arrested heard that. And that was how we were able to get the information back that this is how it's all connected. When you have these kinds of events, you have a connection between Israel, Morton County, and the pipeline, and Oakland. So our resistance is connected too. When we win, it's all our win because it matters. It does impact all of us. So that is kind of like a little bit of a snapshot of the kind of political engagement that we do. We do a lot of different kinds of work. A lot of it is focused on the prison industrial complex. I actually think I have the wrong slideshow up. I'm going to go forward. Yeah. Can we mid switch it? I need to find the other one. I know this is highly unconventional because I'm missing the slides. I'm going to have to email it really quickly. Is that okay? I feel like I prepared things for you all and I'm like, these aren't the right things. Those first ones definitely were. I apologize.
I realized the speakers weren't on back there. Is this any better? Yeah. Oh, good. Okay.
your position, the student from my class, make sure that you sign the sign-up sheet before you leave.
Usually I'm pretty good in the in-between, but I'm totally blanking today. Yes, Michaela, thank you.
Together with feminist future and the Department of Feminist Studies Kristen via a workshop studying with a midwife who specializes in Indigenous birth work. That is at from 3:30 to 5:30. Unless Maestras Center is South Hall 1415. There's some flyers circulating on Maestras Center Instagram. So also and that's on what of Dallas Maestras Center collaboration that
Good. Everyone pretend like you're not gonna look at my email.
Sorry, I spent a lot of time like customizing what I want to share with you all, and
Did you send those like keynote?
yeah, I think you can't open it. Should
Let's see what happens. I don't think it's gonna open.
Expert. PowerPoint. Oh, my PowerPoint.
Any other library announcements? Did anyone read Crying at Beachmark? That's our UCSB reads book. I read it. I cried. Consent?
say we run in the subject line. Excuse my lack of tech savvy today. We will get there. There we go.
Okay. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Here's the display. Okay. Intermission over.
Thank you. Thank you for bearing with me as we adjusted. So fast forward through the parts we went through. Recap. Oh yeah, like this slide, I should have known. I was like, didn't I change all these? Which I did. This is kind of showing a sense of that, like echoing of the OSPAL posters, the ones in the 70s, the lingual, which, you know, I like when we work with social movements, bringing that back up, because even more now, like in the neighborhood I live, over 110 languages are spoken. So I'll walk down the street and I'm like, I have no idea what language that is. And I love that. So some of the social movement work that we do includes responsive work to things that emerge, including the ongoing Palestinian solidarity work that we do. However, you know, with the genocide starting, we did more than we had done before. And we kind of looked back to what we did in that shoe store. And what we realized is it wasn't enough for us to activate as artists. We needed to organize other artists. And we did that time and time again. And over the course of about a year and a half, we ended up doing art builds in the most unusual places. We did a tattoo shop one time. We worked out of a queer-friendly gym another time. It was really like a sense of, it doesn't matter where we land as long as we land and gather. And it doesn't matter that this isn't a permanent space as long as we keep moving forward. And throughout the course of that time, we kept building the bench bigger and bigger. So many of the younger artists who we had mentored through classes, we taught a screen printing class entirely over Zoom during the pandemic. We didn't meet the people who were in the class for 2 years. All of those people showed up when we were starting to do this work, and they kept doing the work even after we had stepped back. So over that course of that time, we hand printed 15,000 screen prints that were distributed to people in the San Francisco Bay Area. An additional 6 to 10,000, I don't remember, it's a lot of thousands. I want to say around 10,000 machine run posters that were distributed in the Bay and beyond. And all of it was funded pretty much like by the passing of a hat. We would just be out there and ask for donations. And they were like $3, $5, $10. So imagine how much it took, how many people it took in order to do that. But it really showed, we don't need a grant. We need each other. We need each other. And that proved everything that I had already believed. So we keep doing it, and we don't let anything stop us. I've done a lot more personal work in the past 10 years or so. This is a piece that I made in order to really come out about the fact that I have struggled with suicidal ideation since I was 7 years old. I never told anyone. I was 40 the first time I ever uttered a word about it. And it only happened because I got diagnosed with lung cancer. So death became a lot more imminent in a different way than it ever had. And in that, it made me kind of want to tell the truth about what I had been struggling with. So my work has changed. There's a lot more personal work that is revealing. You know, the political work continues, and it reflects what's happening in the world at that moment. You know, this is a piece that I did during COVID. It was my way of honoring the people in my community that really got the call to action around masking. You know, it was a sense of like mutuality and taking care of each other. And that other piece was made in 2018, just to, you know, you can look at it, you might think I did it this year, right? Just given the political reality that's happening. But that political reality is old. and it's not divided by political party. I've made pieces like this when Obama was the deporter in chief. He had the record for deportations. So for me, this was a response to the way that women were being showed as highly disempowered, as victims, not as fierce political agents of change, taking care of their children, and still having to confront horrible traumas, but not being skewed either. You know, I was like, I don't want to see an image that shows victimization. This is psychological warfare. I know what you're trying to do. And so I'm going to try to interrupt it with an image. I was very much influenced by Emory Douglas, the Black Panther Party, because I was studying his work at that time. So that image was created in my recovery bed after I had surgery for lung cancer. I've done a series of portraits, but portraiture predominates a lot of my work. This is an example of why Dignidad Rebelde was really important, because Jesus and I had extensive conversations on our interest in inverting the historical use of portraiture to elevate the landed, the privileged, royalty, right? Because if you look at the historical archive of what's in the white box, that's who has portraits made of them. I was in France, in Bordeaux, which is one of the areas that has benefited so much from the transatlantic trade slave, but that really isn't talked about. And so there's an immense amount of wealth that was built on the back of Black slaves. And there were portraits of some of the people who are moneyed still. Those names are still the names in Bordeaux. And in the corner, they would have a little portrait of one of their slaves. And it was a status symbol. It was so disgusting. And I had never seen anything quite like it. So it just affirmed to me, I was like, okay, this and this, opposite of what I'm trying to do. For me, elevating the people in our communities that are making change that benefit us all, that elevate values that are about doing good, that elevate values around belonging and that we all belong. It's my way of pushing back against the way portraiture has been used. I think a lot about being a little girl and going to the grocery store with my mom. And I grew up in SoCal and was a little girl in the 80s. And I remember, you know, being shorter, walking up to the line of the grocery store when you get to the part where all the candy is. But before you got to the candy were the magazine racks. And I remember looking in those magazine racks and never, ever seeing anyone who looked like me. It was always someone who was blonde and blue-eyed. And so I couldn't and it didn't look like my mom, didn't look like my sister, didn't look like anyone that was in my immediate sphere. And I remember feeling so hungry to see a reflection of myself. And I think that stayed psychically with me. And so I think that's also really influenced why I get so excited at holding the pencil and being able to determine how the portraiture gets carried out and who gets to be centered in that. I do, you know, other works that aren't singular as well, but I don't see it as an either or, but more as a both and. There's endless paper and endless pencils, and I'll just keep going and going. I'll never be satisfied. This is just a little snapshot of like sometimes how a piece will evolve. So the piece on the left was actually a illustration that I did for a gathering that happened at UC Berkeley. And then I took all the text out and just like left it as an image. And I really liked, and I come back to the cactus again and again because it's an ancestral food that has helped my family really stay healthy. Like when my grandfather was diagnosed with diabetes, he had a very strict limit on like how many tortillas he could eat. And he always had nopales because nopales regulate your blood sugar. So when I was preparing for surgery, I went back to that way of eating and I got super strong. Like it was really good. So that'll come up again and again. And that's what's underneath it. So then I was like, oh, I'm going to extrapolate from that image. And I get here. I'm just showing a little bit of process. It's like the peek behind the curtain of Oz, right? It's like, what's really going on? How do you get there? During the pandemic, in the Bay Area, they passed policy that kept us from going into shared spaces like our studio. They didn't stop anyone collecting rent. We still had to pay even though we couldn't use it. So I was getting really frustrated at home because I wanted to print. I was painting, but it wasn't the same. I wanted to make multiples. I wanted to have the rhythm of what it was like to print. And I figured out how to adapt using vinyl as a sticker to put on screens to make the stencil. If you're not familiar with screen printing, this might not make sense to you, but it eliminated a lot of the equipment you normally need. I learned it from someone else. I didn't invent this. I saw a woman in Texas who was making t-shirts, like one color t-shirts. And I thought, if she can do a one color t-shirt, I can do a 5-color print on paper. And that's exactly what I went for. I got a very small, very like, humble grant, but it was a big deal. It was $300. I was like, I can pay a couple bills or I can buy a cricket. So I was a cricket. I was like, if I'm not going to take a chance on myself, no one else is going to. And it was a game changer. I printed more that year that I got the cricket than I ever had before because I was printing every day. And I started to adapt how I was printing. So I invented a process that I call my jazz prints because they're all intuitive. They're not planned out. I don't know what they're going to end up being. So I'll just lay down a field of color and then I stare at it and I'm like, what else does it want? Then I'll do something else and I keep building. So these are like that. I didn't know this is what they were going to be. I just kept adding. And so a lot of it, I think, is subconscious. These are also like that. They like elevate things that are on my mind. They really echo a lot of things that come up my dreams. Like the one on the far left is definitely one of the subconscious ones. My uncle came to a solo show I had in Oakland maybe like 3 weeks ago, and he was like, that one, that's your mom when she was young. And I was totally blown away because this was one of the pieces I did without a photo reference. This is probably like the 6th piece like this where someone's like, this is your dad, that's your friend Crystal. So apparently, I looked it up, many artists, when they don't work from reference, go to their subconscious and they'll bring people that they see often into the work. And I was like, oh, I did it again. Hi, Mom. Hi, young mom. And it absolutely does look like her. She was young. So yeah, I keep playing with this process to free myself up from the stress that I normally feel with planning something out from soup to nuts. Like this just lets me improvise. I imagine, because I'm not a musician, that's what jazz feels like, right? You just really get to inhabit that spirit of freedom and the melody just carries you somewhere different. That's how this feels to me. Like this middle one, I'll talk about a little bit. It's just an X, the letter X drawn and laid out a bunch of different ways. And this is kind of a funny one. It's called, the first one's pronounced chi, the second one's pronounced X, which is in reference to the term Chicanx. And this is me pushing back against generations who were refuting the use of the X at the end and the beginning of Chicanx. I was really disappointed that the previous generations couldn't see how the younger generations wanted to have a space to hold gender and sexuality fluidity, because they also fought for their space, right? And how could you not recognize a very similar call for inclusion? And so instead of just getting mad and fighting with people on social media, which is what I saw people in my life do, I was like, I'm gonna process it a little different. And this was me processing it. So that's also what art is for me. It lets me think and feel things. And the one other thing besides the X that I put in were these little temple shapes, because I'm like, this is all a result of colonial thinking, because we didn't have those gender binaries. So like, why are we embracing them now? so dumb. You know, that's what's underneath it all. I'm like, right? I didn't go and say that to someone on social media. I made an art piece. Um, so I continue to do that. And some of it is like narratives. So I started to make major changes in my life. And as I started making major changes in my life, I started seeing dragonflies. So when I would be like at a crossroads about what I needed to do, a dragonfly would appear. And so that's a little bit of like my story. I'm like, when I was like confused about what decision I could make, which way I should go, I was like, okay, I'd be out in the world. And then a dragonfly would appear in the places they should not be, where there is nothing for a dragonfly. There's no water. It's like really gritty urban area, or it's like not even the season for them to be out. And I'm like, all right. So that's also reflecting on like what happens in my real life. So I call this one El Camino de las Libélulas, which is dragonflies in Spanish. I continued to push myself. Like this piece is 13 layers of color, and that one's 12. So I'm trying to outdo myself every time I competition with myself. I did this for another solo show that I had. Those focus on music. Both of them are really speaking to the time that we're in. This piece I did about music because the presenting space is focused on working with artists who address music. Like they're doing gig posters and posters to promote concerts, but I wanted to do something that showed like a contemporary woman of color playing music now. Like I could see, you know, walking through the streets. Like I loved seeing footage. I think it was of Las Cafeteras kind of leading folks in song to protest against ICE. I was like, that's the spirit of what this is. But I wanted to ground it in history. So I found a picture of Woody Guthrie holding the guitar that he wrote This Machine Kills Fascists on. And I traced it. I scaled it to size to the guitar she had, so it would be his hand in my print, right? His handwriting, which I imagine he was the one that wrote it. Maybe it wasn't. And that was like my nod to the history of the resistance against fascism, but through the arts, through music, through our cultures, through the thing that gives us life. So that was how these elements came together. The hands are hands for prayer. Again, the nopales go back to how I see it as a very important medicine. The sun above her head, the thing that we are blessed with every day. And then the one on the far right is a very subtle anti-war poster. In those days, I was already starting to do the layout for the capas, which are kind of echoing papel picado, but not papel picado, right? Like just evoking it. And so it ended up being kind of a contrast because, you know, you think of papel picado and it's like a celebration. And I was like, and they're talking about going to war tomorrow. And so the next day I was like, no, this is happening. So I ended up juxtaposing this woman who looks like she's both singing and crying out. And I put a peace lily on the floor as if it dropped all of a sudden, because that's what it felt like to me. And then the centerpiece is just something I don't want to totally get into, but it's addressing sexual predation that's happening in our communities. You know, the article that came out about Cesar Chavez really cracked open quite a few things, including people that are targeting young women in our communities, and being part of the call out and the call for accountability was really important to me. And so again, because making artwork is how I live life, this was me processing why I decided to be so active in that space. I recorded a video that went very public, like got seen by 90,000 people. I didn't expect that to happen, but it actually had impact in an outcome. And it was a lot to process. But when I thought about like why, because people were like, well, what compelled you? And I was like, well, if what I did could stop just one more person's life being changed by the trauma of having to survive that, that's worth it, because the only people that are going to keep us safe are us. So that's that idea that we keep us safe. We can't wait for someone else to do it. We can't wait for it to be someone else's problem. Yeah, so again, everything goes into the artwork. And the latest print, which was produced yesterday in the art department here in Santa Barbara, with the assistance of students from the art department and students from the Chicanic Studies department. This one's Pan para todex y rosas también too. Bread for all, but roses too, which, really is a nod to the movement that came out of Lawrence. It was garment workers, and then there's a woman who came up with that, and then there was a poet who wrote a poem based on that. So there's like iterations of movement and culture, to the fact that we talk about bread and roses as both being the way that like labor and organizing can get you the things you need, get you the goods. But it's not enough to just have that we have to have all of the things that go beyond the basics of survival. So this was kind of my way of reflecting that, because I was in a rose garden in LA last week and just really was contemplating the symbol of a rose. And to close, these are the direction of, this is like the direction my work is going in now. I've been doing soft sculpture, which is sculpture that's structured out of fabric and stuffing. It's all material, including even just printing on fabric. I don't have a great photo of that. That was at the opening. Someone took a picture of me, so excuse the social media. But I wanted to share because it's probably hard to see that the central figure in that fabric is an adult version of this little girl. So I got the idea because I did it first when I was commissioned by SEIU to do a poster to elevate their slogan. And I decided to use one of the little girls as an adult and make her like an organizer. She had like a SEIU shirt, and she had the same Afro puffs that she had when I drew her as a little girl. So I'm just doing that now. I mean, this is the fun thing about being an artist. You can do whatever you want. Imagining that life structure. And I was telling a friend about it because I was excited. And she was like, you should do another piece that shows them all together as elders. So you go through the full life cycle. So that's on deck. And to close, this is the Goyoshaki sculpture that I made for the Oakland Museum. It's called La Mas Chingonex, Goyoshaki Remembered, with the hyphen between the re and the membered. I want to continue to do sculptural works that use historical mythologies, if that makes sense as a term, as vehicles for telling stories about what we deal with today. So being able to do this moon goddess and put her back together, because she was found as a fragmented stone representation, was really important. And a lot of this was informed by Shirley Moraga's rewriting of the story, which told us that her brother coming into the world was the birth of patriarchy and war, and his murder of his sister and the 400 other siblings who were the moon and the stars, for me, became the first femicide that we know in Mexico. So really making this was my way to talk about, us being whole beyond being fragmented, that wholeness really being a resistance to colonialism, patriarchy, and war. And because it was happening at the time when the genocide was at its height, I wanted to do a subtle nod to what I was doing, because I had to step away from organizing in the streets to go home and work on a piece of art, which I had a really hard time doing. I was really close to dropping out of this show. I was like, I don't know if this is important. I don't know if this is the right thing to do with my time. But my friends were like, it's absolutely the right time, and you have to use it to speak. And so this is the way that I did that. the Anti-Defamation League came after this sculpture because they wanted the museum to label it as anti-Semitic. And I remember my first response was, what? Why? Like, I'm just an independent artist in Oakland. Like, I don't have any, like, I'm not funded. I'm not like a big thing. Like, this, I really don't want to deal with this right now. Like, there's so many other things that we have to do. And as I processed it, it was the same words, but a different attitude. I was like, wait, I'm just an independent artist making a sculpture on my own. And the $80 million org that's massive and going after huge institutions thinks I'm a threat because I made a piece of art. I'll make 20 more. I'll get other people to help me make more. Like, it switched, right? First, it was kind of like, oh, shrunk into myself. And then I was like, wow, art can be very powerful. So it was interesting to go through that process. Luckily, we have an amazing director at the Oakland Museum, because at that point across the country, so many institutions had capitulated to those kind of demands. And the Oakland Museum said no. The Oakland Museum said no. So I have great respect for that decision. And yeah, I mean, what it taught me is I do need to make 20 more of these. I need to keep doing this work, because if it has that much power in it, because really it's just kind of like a stuffed pillow. It's fabric with pillow stuffing in it. Like, wow, what else can we do? And what else can we do together? And that's the question that I'm going into, because I'm going to be applying to grad school for an MFA program at this late of date. Because I want to figure out how to do this work collectively the way I've done the printmaking collectively. Thank you. I don't know if we're going to do questions in this process since it's live streamed. Okay. Okay. So that I'll talk a little bit about that moment in time. I was working full time at a foundation, and the whole time I worked at that foundation, I was also becoming a practicing artist. It aligned really well. I landed with someone who was a huge backer of the arts, so she was really supportive. I happened to have a sabbatical that was up for me when the the Antiquities Museum in Bordeaux reached out and said, we're going to host an exhibit called Chicano Dream. It's primarily Cheech Marin's exhibit, of his collection. However, we would like to include a body of political prints. We saw Rupert Garcia's work and we were looking for like a younger version of him. And so they landed on Dignidad Rebelde at some point. And at that time, I asked if they would be able to like point us in direction to appeal for support for travel. Because a lot of European countries, they have a very different attitude towards the arts, right? And I was like, never hurts to ask. I didn't think they would say yes, which they didn't. They said, no, we don't have that. I was like, okay, I always ask. So then 2 weeks before the exhibit, they called and said, guess what? You guys are the second major lenders after Cheech. So because we positioned you that way, because I think we had like 17 pieces in the show, we can fly you out. We'll pay for your accommodations while you're here. You'll have a daily allowance. You'll have all your meals covered. You'll have a local host, and we'll like tour you around. So it went from nothing to everything. And so I decided to take the sabbatical at that time. When we went to France. We were there for a couple days in Paris and then went to Bordeaux. But at the same time, there was a school happening in Barcelona, which was a decolonizing school. People from all over the world came that were working on decolonial academia. Like they were all based in the academy and doing writing. And so I was gathering people from like South Africa and New Zealand and just really like all over. And we would like get together in the places where the Spanish Revolution happened and the plazas, and we would talk about like politics and organizing and just all the things that were important to us. So it really was nice because it all coincided at the same time. And a lot of, most experiences like that end up being very generative. And often I feel like I'm always looking out for the whatever group of young Chicanas I find, which there was a whole contingent of Chicanas that went to the decolonial school, and I would cook for them because I wasn't part of the school, so I could just do whatever I wanted. I was like, well, I'll be at the apartment cooking, come after and you can eat. And then I would go sometimes to lectures, but I wasn't married to because I wasn't in the class. It was great. I was like, I do what I want. But yeah, I've traveled a few places, Mexico for sure, done different kind of exchanges. I've been to Canada to do a decolonizing street art project. I think there was one image in the slideshow of that where we're painting a mural. That's another fun story. And then I'll leave it at that. So I was there to do these murals. The mural that we were painting that has like a rainbow of colors was being installed. And there were a group of auto workers that worked around the corner in a shop, and they would come by every day. They were like also diasporic. I think the guy that came the most was Argentinian, and his wife was Mexican. And he would talk to me every day. And they loved the fact that public art was going up. And I don't think they were like permissioned by the city with the decolonizing street art. It was like, we have permission from the building owner and we're just going to do it, see what happens. So it was like that. And so he was so enthused that he said he was going to talk to his boss about getting the wall of the shop for another mural. And I was like, yeah, it's probably not going to happen. I don't know. I just thought he was being nice, but it happened. He got permission. We ended up installing on the street that it was on was Colonial Street. I was like, oh my God, it's going to be more perfect. So we ended up installing this huge blow up of an indigenous woman that I have in the back. She has braids and she's holding a stalk of corn. And then there's also, she's armed because she's Zapatista. And then we interspersed that with pieces from one of the Mohawk artists. So kind of having a very hemispheric indigenous identity in this piece. And then like we wheat pasted silkscreen posters that said Tierra Indígena and had the Americas. So it was like all the elements. That was like one of my favorite things because it was not planned. It was responsive. It came from working class heroes to me that advocated for us to have space. And it really was about an exchange because all of that got shaped out of these daily conversations as these guys had breaks. So I always look forward to those kind of things, but I can never know what to expect because they're very organic. Yeah, that was really fun. That's the only time I've been to Canada. Yeah. Thank you. Mm, mm, mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's an excellent question. No one's ever asked me that. Yeah, so the question, well, the part that stands out for me most, you're talking about mental health and yeah, the kind of burning question to me is like, how was I able to advocate to empower others when I wasn't fully empowered myself? I was really struggling. I don't know if I have the answer for that, so maybe I'll talk around it. So at that time when I was making that piece and deciding, I told my partner at the time when I was being diagnosed, I was like, that I've been suicidal my whole life. I started looking for a therapist. So that was like my effort to do something about it. And the first person I reached out to, who was a therapist, when I told her I was suicidal, said, I can't take you on. And it crushed me because I was like, wait, isn't this a thing you all do? Like, how are you gonna like reject me? Do you know that's one of my like key triggers, is feeling like I don't belong and you're rejecting me as a therapist? This is so effed up. Like, this couldn't be the worst first experience I have. So I stopped. I stopped looking because I was like stunned. And some time passed, but she actually followed up because I think she felt something. She must have felt how I felt. Like, you know, she must have perceived that it impacted me, because she ended up sending me an email saying, you know, I'm sorry that I can't support you. I looked into maybe other folks that could be a good match for you. And that's how I ended up finding my therapist. So for one, I think really because I do talk quite a bit about like what that has transformed in my life, and I can see the difference in those like past 3-4 years that it's been, having that kind of support, having the tools that come with therapy. And the more I did that, and the more I talked to her about talking about all the taboos, you know, she was the one that said, hey, I realize that this issue of like, I just have to say, like rape and like sexual predators keeps coming up in your life. And I know you have like this history in your family. And she's like, I don't know if you feel like you're being called to action, but whatever you do, whatever timetable it is, it's right. So don't feel pressure to do anything until you're ready. So when this whole issue came up, around these 3 men who are printmakers, who have used that space to manipulate young artists that are trying to do more, I heard her saying that to me, like, you'll act when you know you need to act. And I was like, I need to do something. I can't just sit here. I can't be like nearing 50 and know that if I was like the one who was in my early 20s and someone that I looked up to like that didn't do anything, how abandoned I would feel. Like, those are some of my issues, right? So you're talking about like, how do I do that? And I'm like, that's how I heal, by doing something, by being the person I needed. And it was effective. It worked. And seeing that, I was like, everybody else got to see that too. So then, you know, then there was communication and there's more organizing. And so it's like almost like a domino effect, right? If my therapist wouldn't have said that, I don't know if I would have done what I did. But I also know, I don't know if I would have done what I did if when I was in LA and a couple of the people that I know that were survivors, when they asked me, can we talk to you? We know we're going to a celebratory dinner for you, but can we bring up a heavy subject? And I said, yes. They led me. So it's kind of like, you know, it's not, there's no individual act, that's all collective. And so I see how other people's actions influence my actions. And I think with the process of doing this work, you know, I talked about the workshops being this horizontal space for knowledge. A lot of the times we are talking about the hard things, you know, whether it's the hard things that come from perceivably the outside, like deportation, or the way that we're reproducing systems of oppression in our more intimate spaces, like our families and our friendships, right? All of those places are valid places for change and necessary places for change. You know, I think sometimes it's harder to talk about the stuff that's closer to us. It's easier to be like, Trump is trash, he's the worst, the whole administration, right? But we talk about like our very problematic uncle and how maybe our mom doesn't want to like hold him to account because it's her brother. It's a lot harder, but we have to talk about it. And so after I got diagnosed with cancer, that was my promise to myself. I'm not gonna stop talking about things, even if people feel uncomfortable, because I can see it in the room. I can see people shift around. I can see the energy shifts. And I'm like, I got to the point where I have to not care about that. That's their stuff to hold. I can perceive it, but it's not going to stop me talking about the stuff, even if it's something that's uncomfortable. So that's where I'm at with it. Like, I think you gave me a question that is a gift, because I need to really think about that, to really think back. Like, how did I? Because I abandoned myself, but I didn't abandon my community. And what did that do? And like, I'm kind of getting emotional. What did that cost? And who did it cost? Yeah, thank you for that. What's your name? Anna. Thank you for that. It's a really important question. I don't know if I'm ever going to have the full answer to it. Those are the best questions. Thank you.
I'm just getting close to the thing so they could hear me. Thank you all. If Melanie is here, if you have questions, there's some snacks and refreshments in the back. And you can view some of her work in person over here. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.